the vessels and the blood ever intertwined, the story we tell. My interest in cardiovascular physiology actually began during my undergraduate days at the University of Benin, because I was given a project that had to investigate the effects of allium cepa, which is our common onion, and allium sativum, garlic, on rats' blood pressure, AHBOR 1993. And the choice of my specific area at the postgraduate level was somewhat accidental, because my husband was already in the UK, and I was looking for the most convenient space. And the space that was available was with my supervisor, Professor Niels Corway, at the University of Glasgow. Professor Ebe, a dear friend of my husband, was the one who introduced me to the physiology department at the University of Glasgow. So I would say that even though at the time I did not know and appreciate God, who is my Father, as I do now, He was indeed ordering my footsteps, and I give Him the glory and the honor and the adoration. And so I began my journey in the academic field up to the level I am today. So this lecture I'm going to give discusses the interwoven nature of the component parts of the cardiovascular system. The heart is the pump, the blood vessels are the conduits, and the blood, the transport medium. And I want to look specifically at vascular reactivity, how the blood vessels react in response to the changes in the chemical environment. Because the changes would actually influence the heart's pumping ability and consequently the effectiveness of the blood, all its role. Because the blood is a transporter, it's a distributor, it's a regulator, it's a protector, it's a controller, and it's a provider. Blood, is very vital to life. Several interventions to modify the biochemical environment of the blood vessels have been used to study their reactivity. And because they are so interwoven with the heart and the blood, any changes in the blood vessels will consequently affect functions of both the heart and the blood. The major part of this lecture will be addressing how pH, which is a measure of the acidity and the alkalinity of a solution, how it can affect the smooth muscle cells that are of course found in the blood vessels. Now, in response to their chemical and biological environment, these vascular smooth muscles will either contract or dilate to subsequently influence the ability, the pumping ability of the heart, which in turn will affect the effective functions of the blood, which we all know is quite vital to life. pH, which is the measure of the acidity or alkalinity of the environment, was modified severally, and the mechanisms by which both extracellular pH, that is the pH that is outside of the cell, and the intracellular pH, which is the pH inside of the cell, how these pHs affect the tone. When we say vascular tone, we are talking about the ability of the blood vessels to either vasodilate or contract. So the tone is that capacity. And we also look at the way pH itself is regulated in these muscles. pH was modified at constant intracellular pH was modified at constant extracellular pH using two procedures. One is the application and withdrawal of carbon dioxide, and the second is the ammonium pulse technique, which involved the application and washout of an ammonium salt. And the significant thing about this work is that it pioneered the use of the ammonium pulse technique in the vascular smooth muscle itself. There are other related areas I have researched in. diets and variations of hematological indices, cholesterol, and electrolytes in Nigeria. These are things that are somewhat also related to what we eat and what we take in and what gets into our blood. Essential nutrients and immunological factors in the breast milk of Nigerian mothers, and some hematological parameters and hypertension in Nigerians, and then intraocular pressure changes in the female reproductive cycle, because IOP, as it is called, is somewhat, does somewhat correlate with the systemic blood pressure. And then I also looked at the environmental noise because of the noisy environment that we live in. Noise is actually a stressor. It can produce hypertension, apart from the fact that it can cause hearing impairment. A lot of us are partially deaf as a result of the noise that we are constantly exposed to. Interested in investigating 7 areas concerning gender science and technology, one of which led us to look at the impact of the environmental pollution due to oil exploration in and spills in the Niger Delta. Now, my home state, Delta State, is the big heart of the nation, and I'm so proud of Delta State. The state that I'm residing in right now, majority of my work life I've been in Edo State. It is the heartbeat of the nation. So the heart really is something that everybody know is the center of life. So Edo State and Delta State, former Benin State, were the center of life. The heart is the driving power, the pump that helps to move things around. And it has its own network of blood vessels. The blood and its components together, they make life possible and tell a big story. The heart and the vessels and the blood itself are intertwined anatomically and functionally, and so they constitute the cardiovascular system. What is the story they tell? I will give basic information concerning the cardiovascular system at this point, so that most of us here will be carried along, since we are of a mixed community. The cardiovascular system is quite a dynamic system. It's very flexible, it's quite intelligent, and it has many functions, that are vital to life, and it is very efficient and amazingly very, very reliable. And the blood is unique, in the sense that it has made and is the aspect of the cardiovascular system that contributes to the identifiable form of the cardiovascular system, transportation, it transports all the necessary nutrients. It helps to excrete undesired products of metabolism. It helps to distribute all the necessary things that we need, hormones and all that. It helps also regulate our body temperature. It helps to fight off diseases. The blood itself has all the components that help to fight off diseases. It also helps for blood to clot, and it also helps in osmoregulation, which helps to bring about an equilibration in the fluid movement within spaces within the body. And it is a key organ of vital autoregulatory and homeostatic reflexes, such as the baroreceptor and chemoreceptor feedback reflexes, and it also is involved in reproduction. Now, without that, you can see that it's a very vital thing to life. Now, the Word of God tells us in Psalm 90, verse 28, that the days of our lives are 70 years. And in 70 years, the heart is known to beat more than 2.5 billion times in a most reliable and efficient fashion. The day that the heart stops, of course, we know we are going to meet with our Maker. That's why it's essential for us to be prepared in the right way, so that we will indeed make heaven. The heart has 4 chambers and weighs just about 300 to 250 grams, very small. It contracts more than 100 times in a day, and it pumps over 7,200 liters of blood per day. It can vary its output just to adjust to maintain constancy in its pressure that's appropriate for whatever conditions that you find yourself in case you are exercising, and you adjust. And it controls the properties of the blood vessels to redirect blood flow in order to satisfy the demands of the body under various physiological states, such as when you are resting or when you are exercising. That is just a simulation of the heart that is beating. The blood vessels, they are the tubes, three major types: the arteries, the capillaries, and the veins. The arteries carry blood away from the heart. As they move away from the heart, they branch repeatedly to form smaller and smaller vessels until they get to the arterioles, which are actually the resistant vessels. Arteries typically carry oxygenated blood, except the one that takes blood to the lungs. Capillaries are the smallest and the most numerous, and usually it's at capillary level that things are changing. Oxygen is delivered into the interstitium to cells for utilization, and waste products are brought out and transported back. So there are sites for exchange. The exchange is facilitated because they are very thin in their structure and they are vast in number. So they connect the arteries and the veins. The veins are the ones that return the blood back to the heart. As they provide the heart, they converge and then they join to form larger and larger veins until they enter the heart. So the smallest veins are the venules, and we receive blood from the capillaries. This is the structure of blood vessels. Capillaries, for capillaries, they contain only a thin membrane to make our interior. This is just illustrating the way from the large one, you can see the aorta, very big, and then to the smallest, which is the capillary, the smallest. Now the blood flow is affected because blood flow to the various systemic tissues is actually related to the organ that they are flowing to. So it relates to their weight and to the level of their activity. If it's kidneys, if it's skin, you find that sometimes you have extra blood flow to areas that are needed, and so on and so forth. There are other examples of systemic tissues, such as the brain, liver, the heart itself is supplied by its network of vessels, and then the gastrointestinal tract, and so on. So in times when you need increased metabolic needs, for example, when you're exercising, the heart and the skeletal muscles will increase their blood flow to satisfy the increased metabolic needs. The brain is always protected anyway, because it's a very vital organ. So the changes in blood flow are regulated by hormones, the autonomic nervous system, which act both on the heart and the blood vessel, and also some local mechanisms that act on the vessels, especially the arterioles, which are resistant vessels. So you find that the blood pressure, we say BP, is equal to the cardiac output and total peripheral resistance. And blood pressure is actually the force that is generated by the heart to create the flow of blood in the vessels. And the cardiac output is actually the volume of blood pumped out of each ventricle per minute. And the cardiac output is dependent on the rate at which the heart is beating. And then the stroke volume, which is the amount of blood that goes back into the heart. So there's a relationship, of blood pressure being equal to the cardiac output, total peripheral resistance. And so we have a relationship of blood pressure depending on the rate at which the heart is beating, and also the amount of blood that goes back, and the resistance to flow that is posed, upon the whole system, especially by the blood vessels. Total peripheral resistance is the sum of all the vascular resistance within the systemic circulation. That's why we say total peripheral resistance. Now, the radius of these arterioles affects blood flow, and that's why blood flow to an organ is largely determined by the degree of vasoconstriction and vasodilatation. So the critical link, I have taken time, Vice Chancellor, to explain this basic physiology, which I'm sure our students here are very familiar with. The critical link here is that the heart and the blood vessels are very sensitive to changes in the plasma levels of a variety of substances, such as carbon dioxide, oxygen, and pH. That is the rate at which the environment is either acid or alkaline. It's also sensitive to the electrolytes that are there, such as calcium, potassium. When in our diets, you get potassium, they will tell you don't eat too much salt and so on and so forth, because the heart and the blood vessels are sensitive to changes in all these parameters. So also drugs, those of us that love to take caffeine, nicotine, and then to other substances that we call sympathomimetic substances like ephedrine. So any modification of their environment will cause them to either dilate or constrict. Consequently, this will affect blood pressure. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, as you can see, changes in the caliber or the diameter of the blood vessels can result from contraction or relaxation of the smooth muscles that are found within the cell. And I have taken steps to give this basic physiological relationship between the heart and the blood vessels and the blood, just to enunciate how intertwined they are and how critical they are to life. Vascular tone. By modifying both the extracellular pH, which is the pH outside of cells, and intracellular pH, which is the pH inside the cell, observing their effects on vascular tone. I, however, pursued principally the matter of intracellular pH modifications using the ammonium pulse technique. I'm proud to announce that we pioneered the use of this technique on vascular smooth muscles as against the use of an alternative one, which is the bicarbonate carbon dioxide technique. Now, when you look at history, Gaskell, as far back as 1880, observed that when you change the extracellular environment of both the systemic resistant vessels and the heart, it becomes alkaline. There is usually relaxation when that occurs. And ever since then, it has been widely accepted that the tone of these resistant vessels and hearts was affected by the pH of the medium that bathes them. Elliot and Jasper in 1949 exposed the surface of the brain to an acidic medium and observed vasodilatation. And then other workers like Wall et al. Microinjected bicarbonate ions and constant CO2 into cerebrospinal fluid of anesthetized rats and cats and produced vasoconstriction in their vessels. Potter reported decrease in excitability and conductance of cardiac cells with the external acidity, and Ellen and all produced reduction in cardiac contractility with acidity of the external environment. So a common feature of all these observations is that there is an indication of the importance of extracellular pH besides mineral factors, besides chemical factors, in vasodilatation and constriction, and therefore in the regulation of blood flow. And it sounds physiologically very, very reasonable because it's an adaptive advantage. When blood vessels that are supplying acidotic tissues dilate to increase flow, so you can take away the acid because you don't want acid. For example, if you exercise, you accumulate lactic acid, carbon dioxide, you need to get rid of it because you don't want that environment there. So the blood vessels will dilate as a result of the acidity to increase the blood flow to carry away all these things that you don't need. So both carbon and lactic acid, however, can pass through cell membranes. So therefore, presumably, people were thinking that it's the intracellular pH that was affected, and it was affected in the same as the extracellular pH. Moreover, the contractile system, because for cells to, muscle cells to contract, you have myofibers, actin myosin, and you have different types of muscle cells, skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscles which we are talking about. They are usually inhibited by acidity. So it was therefore a reasonable postulate that the main site of pH action was intracellular on the actomyosin. In a more complex way than extracellular pH were obtained by Magellan in 1974. They investigated noradrenaline activated vascular bed of the rabbit artery and moving middle cerebral artery strips, the phosphate and bicarbonate buffer solutions. And in the phosphate buffer, the both preparations vasodilated very markedly when the extracellular pH was lower, that is made acid. With bicarbonate buffer, physiologically adjusting the carbon dioxide and assuming that both the pH inside the cell and the pH outside the cell are varying together. The changes they produce in the vascular system are small and sometimes inconsistent, and they are often bidirectional. But if you vary the external bicarbonate while keeping the internal the carbon dioxide tension constant, this will alter only the pH outside of the cell to produce an acid dilatation, which is usually two-thirds that in the phosphate buffer medium. At least over a range of the pH, if not all of it. Now, varying extracellular bicarbonate proportionally to the carbon dioxide tension, it will alter intracellular pH. Increasing PCO2 will be expected to acidify the cytoplasm, actually cause vasoconstriction. However, an alternative explanation to the concept of opposing actions of body, that is, that the cell inside, the pH of the cell inside and the pH of the cell outside, the opposing effect for the last group result was that the effect of carbon dioxide might actually be a direct molecular interaction at the intracellular site. That carbon dioxide actually was acting on intracellular site. Intracellular pH and vasculature, and to identify the mechanisms that are involved. But my observations of the effect on vasculature due to the procedures I employed led further for the investigation of mechanisms that are involved in the adjustments of pH-induced changes in the tone, and therefore the regulation of the intracellular pH. Now, this lecture therefore discusses various methods used to modify the pH of vascular model, the mechanisms involved, and also the effects of these modifications on vascular tone. Other preparations studied the perfused whole femoral bed wrap of rabbits, front whole body rat tail, the perfusing solutions were phosphate, hippies, bicarbonate buffer regular solutions, bulk ions, chloride, Bamosa IGHOROJE, Paul, and Taggart. pH was modified at constant pHO using two different procedures. One was the application and withdrawal of carbon dioxide, and the other the menopause technique, IGHOROJE and Paul, 1984-85. The procedures which can be accepted to lower pH at constant pH raise tone, while the reverse steps reduce it. So applying ammonium or lowering or withdrawing of carbon dioxide dilated the vascular bed, while withdrawal elevated or elevation of the application of carbon dioxide constricted it. The space within the cell to form ammonia and hydrogen ions, and this blunts their alkalinization. If you remove ammonium